Hello, my name is Victoria Browning Wyeth, and I am Andrew and Betsy Wyeth's granddaughter. After much thought, I felt that discussing my grandfather's portraits of his wife, as well as her role in his life, was the best way to honor her. Before we begin to look at all the beautiful portraits my grandfather Andy did of my grandmother Betsy and the objects that represented her, it's important to tell you how their story began. Andy was spending his summers in a fishing village in mid-coast Maine called Port Clyde. One day, his father, Betsy Wyeth, was spending some time with a local artist, Jim James. We called him Pom Pom in our family. Jim looked at NC and said something to the effect of, "You know, I have 3 stunning daughters. We all live in Cushing. You should bring your son Andy to visit." Shortly thereafter, on the afternoon of his 22nd birthday, July 12th, my grandfather hopped into his car and drove 30 minutes to the nearby town of Cushing. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed that the mailbox had the following initials on it: M.D. James. At this point, Andy got super nervous that he was about to meet a doctor. As he walked into the house, he introduced himself to his future wife, the 17-year-old beauty, Betsy James. He then proceeded to tell the family how he was studying to be a doctor. Of course, this couldn't be farther from the truth, but as we always say in my family, if it wasn't, it should have been. Just to explain, Andy thought that MD stood for doctor, not Pom Pom's initials, Merle Davis James. After chatting with the family, he looked at my grandmother and said, "I don't know Cushing well. Could you please show it to me?" Of all the places she could have taken him, she decided that her friends Christina and Alvaro Olson best represented Cushing, and off they went. I think you all know how the story ended. My grandfather ended up painting the Olsons, their house, and every object connected to them for over 30 years. How fitting that the place they went on their first date is also their final resting place. My grandmother was a woman of many interests and talents. She loved to knit, read, do crossword puzzles. She was famous for always doing the infamously impossible New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle in ink, and thus had an almost magical ability to title her husband's paintings. In the summertime, she would pick blueberries and raspberries at our summer home in Cushing. One day, after an exhausting pick, she decided to take a snooze in the grass. Discussing the tempered distant thunder, Andy noted, "It started out early in the spring. One day I took a walk and she was lying down. I said, 'Oh my God, that's it.' Rattler, our dog, was sitting off to the side. What amazed me is she had pulled her hat down, and of course, that gave me the idea of showing the hat with a little bit of her chin showing. That just made the picture. You don't want to show too much and make it obvious." The title Distant Thunder refers to a distant thunderstorm in Waldoboro, a nearby town. One warm summer day, Betsy was sitting on the beach in Cushing alongside my grandfather. This was the inspiration for the 1953 tempera sandspit. Andy pointed out, "Sandspits always interested me. The tide creeping up, the way the tide moves up and down. It was done directly across from the house. I sat low so I could see the top of the pine trees. It seemed to express Maine on a clear morning. Very minutely done." In 1968, Andy painted the tempera outpost of his wife Betsy standing in front of the granary next to their house in Chadds Ford. The idea started when Andy was headed out in the car to paint. He looked in his rearview mirror and saw his wife standing behind him. He explained, "I went up to Christina Olson's funeral in Maine while working on this. I thought after it began to snow up there, God, I should be home working on that." Betsy always loved wearing hats. In 1966, her husband captured this perfectly in the tempera Maga's Daughter. The title refers to Betsy's mother, Elizabeth James, who had the nickname Maga. This is an early Quaker hat that Betsy purchased and her husband decided would be perfect for her portrait. My grandmother had a deep affection for birds, so much so that she would write down the date and type of bird she saw in her copy of Kaufman's Birds of North America. Almost like a necklace, her binoculars hung from her neck year-round. When she couldn't find them, she'd say, "Where are my binocs?" My grandfather documented them numerous times in watercolors, such as Starfish, Tundra, and the tempera ship's door. Every summer, my grandparents made the pilgrimage from Chad's Ford to their summer home in Maine. When they were younger, they would load up the car and endure the 10-hour drive. However, as they aged, they found this increasingly taxing. As a result, in the late 1990s, a friend offered to fly them. In the 2002 Tempera Otherworld, we see Betsy gazing out of one of the windows of the plane, looking at their property in Pennsylvania. The magical element in this painting is demonstrated in the view outside the second window. We see their summer home, Benner Island. People often ask why Betsy is painted from behind. As Andy said, "I feel it's more exciting this way because it makes you wonder what she looks like in front." In addition to being his wife, she was also his curator. She spent countless days and nights cataloging his work, interviewing him about the techniques and deeper meaning behind the art. He captured her hard at work in the 2003 watercolor Ghosts. A more tender side of my grandfather is evident in a study for the painting, on which he scribbled, "My sweetheart at work," across the bottom of the drawing. In the summertime, my grandfather would spend the weekdays at our family farm in Cushing, and then on Friday, he would take a boat to see my grandmother on Benner Island. One early Sunday morning, before going ashore for the week, he rolled over and saw my grandmother sleeping on her side of the bed. He noted how he loved the feeling of the crumpled sheets, with the little sliver of blue ocean peeking in through the window above the bed. Although she is not physically in the paintings, there are numerous instances in which my grandmother is there even when you don't see her. Two paintings that beautifully demonstrate this point are the Tempera's Monday Morning and Her Room. On Monday morning, my grandmother had just finished doing the wash outside their house in Chad's Ford. She left the laundry basket propped up against the house to dry in the sun. My grandfather explained, a soft snow had fallen during the night, and some of it had blown into the basket. The next morning, I noticed the basket with the snow in it. That's what appealed to me. Snow in a wicker basket. So unusual. If you take it out, it becomes dead. Betsy always kept a very organized house. Nothing was ever out of place. Ever. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the 1965 Tempera Her Room. Not only is this a painting of my grandparents' living room in Cushing, it's also a portrait of my grandmother and her personality. If you look closely, you can see the seashells lined up in descending order on the windowsill. When my father, Nicky, went away to boarding school, his mother was devastated and sobbing because she missed him so much. She then went out on the beach and collected these. 65 years later, they haven't moved an inch. The antique sea chest was purchased by my grandmother. She always had the most wonderful eye for antiques and decorated all of their houses. As a young girl, I always felt as though I was living in an Andrew Wyeth painting. As my grandfather always said, "I paint my life." Clearly, she influenced not only his life, but his art. As we have seen, Betsy played a pivotal role in Andy's life. She titled and framed his work, curated his shows, and most importantly, was the source of inspiration for many of his most famous paintings. One day, while giving a lecture on Andy's work, a museum visitor said to me, "Your grandmother made your grandfather." I was shocked by the comment. When I got home and told Andy, he took one look at me and said, "She made me the artist that I am. Without her, I would be nothing." After almost 70 years of being together and 11 years without each other, my grandparents are finally reunited. My grandmother, Betsy James Wyeth, has left us and joined her loving Andy. You will be missed.